Sarah had always been drawn to old houses. She loved the way they creaked and groaned, as if whispering secrets from the past. She loved the intricate details, the high ceilings, and the sense of history that permeated every room.
So when I learned that I had inherited my grandmother's sprawling Victorian mansion, I was ecstatic. The house was everything I had ever dreamed of. It stood on a hill overlooking the town, surrounded by ancient oaks and shrouded in an air of mystery.
Sarah had spent many happy summers at the house as a child, listening to her grandmother's stories and exploring its hidden nooks and crannies. She remembered the house as a place of warmth and laughter, filled with the scent of her grandmother's baking and the sound of her grandfather's old gramophone. But after her grandparents had passed away, the house had stood empty for years, its windows dark and its gardens overgrown. Now it was hers. Sarah arrived at the house on a blustery autumn afternoon. The sky was overcast, casting a gloomy shadow over the landscape. The house stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the gray sky. Sarah had inherited the house from her great-aunt, a woman she barely knew, and now she was here to claim it. The leaves were turning shades of gold and crimson, and the wind howled through the trees, rattling the shutters on the windows. The trees, tall and ancient, seemed to whisper secrets as the wind rustled through their branches. The house itself looked like it had been plucked straight out of a Gothic novel, with its tall, narrow windows and steeply pitched roof. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves. It was a scent that brought back memories of childhood autumn spent playing in the woods, but here it felt different, more intense, almost oppressive. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the very air was laden with the weight of the past.
As I stepped out of my car, I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from a sense of anticipation. The house loomed before me, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I had read about haunted houses in books and seen them in movies, but standing in front of one in real life was an entirely different experience. I had been looking forward to this moment for months. Ever since I received the letter from the lawyer informing me of my inheritance, I had been filled with a mix of excitement and curiosity. What secrets did this old house hold? What stories were hidden within its walls? I was about to find out.
Taking a deep breath, Sarah inserted the key into the heavy oak door. The key was old and ornate, a relic from a bygone era. It felt cold and heavy in her hand, a tangible connection to the past. She wondered how many hands had held this key before her, and what those hands had experienced. The lock was stiff from disuse, but finally, it turned with a groan. The sound echoed in the stillness, a reminder of the house's long abandonment. Sarah pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly, as if protesting the intrusion. She stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It was clear that no one had set foot in this house for many years. The air inside was stale and musty, heavy with the scent of dust and time. It was a smell that spoke of neglect and abandonment, of years spent in darkness and silence. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Sarah stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Each step seemed to reverberate through the empty house, amplifying the sense of isolation. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she pressed on, determined to explore every corner of her inheritance. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a sense of excitement mixed with a strange feeling of unease. The house was hers now, and with it came a responsibility to uncover its secrets. She didn't know what she would find, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The adventure was just beginning. The first few days passed in a flurry of activity. Sarah had just moved into the old mansion, a place steeped in history and mystery. The house, with its creaky floors and dusty corners, seemed to whisper secrets of the past. Sarah hired a cleaning crew to help her air out the house and dust off the furniture. She unpacked boxes, hung curtains, and meticulously arranged her belongings. Each item found its place, and with every box emptied, the house began to feel a little more like home. Gradually, she brought the old house back to life. The once dark and gloomy rooms started to brighten up with her touch. She chose vintage decor to match the house's historic charm, carefully selecting pieces that would honor its past.
I reveled in the history that surrounded me. The house was a treasure trove of stories waiting to be discovered. I spent hours exploring each room, uncovering hidden gems and marveling at the craftsmanship of a bygone era. Running my fingers over the worn velvet upholstery and the intricately carved woodwork, I felt a deep connection to the past. Each piece of furniture, each detail, seemed to have a story to tell. I found old photo albums tucked away in drawers and spent hours poring over them. The faded photographs captured moments of joy, sorrow, and everyday life. They were windows into the lives of the people who had once called this house their home. Imagining the lives of the people who had lived in the house before me, I felt a sense of kinship with them. Their stories, though long forgotten, seemed to echo through the halls, adding to the house's mystique.
At night, Sarah would curl up on the window seat in the library. The library, with its high ceilings and towering bookshelves, was her sanctuary. It was a place where she could escape from the world and lose herself in the pages of a good book. A cup of tea in her hand and a book in her lap, she would sit for hours, absorbed in her reading. The soft glow of the lamp cast a warm light, creating a cozy atmosphere that made her feel safe and content. Listening to the wind whistling through the eaves, she felt a sense of peace that was almost surreal. The sound, though eerie, was oddly comforting. It was as if the house was speaking to her, sharing its secrets in the language of the wind. She felt a sense of peace and contentment that she had never known before. The house, with all its quirks and mysteries, had become her refuge. It was a place where she could be herself, free from the pressures of the outside world. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at home. The house, with its rich history and timeless beauty, had welcomed her with open arms. It was as if she had always belonged there, as if the house had been waiting for her all along. She told herself that the strange feeling she had experienced upon arriving was nothing more than nerves. Moving into a new place, especially one with such a storied past, was bound to be overwhelming. But as the days passed, she grew more comfortable, more at ease. After all, it was a big house, and it was only natural to feel a little overwhelmed at first. But with each passing day, she felt more at home. The house, with its creaky floors and whispering walls, had become a part of her, and she a part of it. Together, they would create new memories, adding to the rich tapestry of its history. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to notice things that she couldn't quite explain.
At first, it was just small things, like the sound of footsteps in the hallway when I knew I was alone, or the feeling that someone was watching me from the shadows.
She would brush these occurrences off, telling herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her.
I reminded myself that the house was old, and old houses creak and groan even when there is no wind.
Then, one night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard a whisper coming from the corner of her room. It was a soft, sibilant whisper, just barely audible above the sound of her own breathing.
I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I listened intently, but the whisper had stopped.
She told herself that it must have been the wind, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling uneasy. The room felt colder than usual, and a sense of dread hung in the air. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The whisper from the night before had disturbed her more than she cared to admit. It was as if the walls themselves had come alive, murmuring secrets that were never meant to be heard by human ears.
I tried to put it out of my mind, but the memory of it lingered, casting a shadow over my day. Every corner I turned, every shadow I saw, seemed to whisper back to me, reminding me of that eerie voice.
She went about her usual routine, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was as if invisible eyes were following her every move, scrutinizing her actions, waiting for her to make a mistake. She kept hearing noises, footsteps on the stairs, the creaking of floorboards, the rustling of curtains, even when she was in rooms with the doors and windows closed. The sounds seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, making her question her own sanity.
One evening, as I was making my way up the grand staircase, I glanced up at the landing above. The shadows seemed to dance and shift, creating shapes that played tricks on my eyes. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was just a silhouette, but it felt so real, so tangible, that I couldn't dismiss it as a mere figment of my imagination.
It It was tall and slender, with long dark hair that cascaded down its back. The figure stood motionless, as if it were waiting for something or someone. The figure seemed to be watching her, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The glow was unnatural, almost otherworldly, and it sent chills down her spine.
I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The air around me felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was closing in on me. I blinked and the figure was gone. But the sense of dread remained, lingering in the air like a heavy fog. I couldn't help but wonder if it was a warning, a sign of things to come. That night, Sarah decided to document her experiences in a journal. She hoped that writing it all down would help her make sense of the strange occurrences. As she wrote, she could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, as if it were alive and aware of her every thought. Her journal entries became more frantic, filled with sketches of the figure and notes about the whispers. She wrote about the cold spots in the house, the feeling of being watched, and the unexplainable noises that seemed to follow her wherever she went. In her search for answers, Sarah began to look through old photographs of the house. She found images of previous owners, some of whom had mysteriously disappeared. The more she dug, the more she realized that the house had a dark history, one that was filled with tragedy and loss. One day, while exploring the house, she discovered a hidden room behind a bookshelf. The room was filled with old, dusty furniture and cobwebs, but it also contained something far more sinister, a collection of old, tattered journals that seemed to belong to the previous owners. The journals were filled with eerie drawings and notes, much like her own. They spoke of the same whispers, the same figure, and the same sense of dread that she had been experiencing. It was as if the house had been haunting its inhabitants for generations. As she read through the journals by candlelight, Sarah felt a growing sense of terror. The entries became more and more disturbing, detailing encounters with the figure and the whispers that seemed to drive the previous owners to madness. That night, as a storm raged outside, Sarah stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. She knew that she had to find a way to break the cycle, to free herself from the house's grip. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. The house had a hold on her, and it wasn't going to let go without a fight. Determined to find answers, Sarah packed a bag and prepared to leave the house. She knew that she needed to get away, to clear her mind and figure out what was real and what was just a product of her imagination. As she walked away from the house, she couldn't help but look back one last time. The house stood there, silent and imposing, as if it were watching her leave. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead.